Thank you very much. Thank you.
You know the background to this. The idea is that we will, as part of our ongoing interest in obviously the vexed issue of the day, as far as it relates to Northern Ireland, be producing a series of reports over time, and the evidence that we hear from this session and others, we hope will be able to shed light on our deliberations and hopefully be reflected in the reports when we write them. So that's the background. With any more ado, what I'd invite you to do, just in 3 minutes if you possibly could, because time is very short given the amount of Northern Ireland business we have in the House today, is just to give us a resume of how you and your party view the current situation with relation to the border specifically.
Okay. Well, thank you for the invitation to come along and to outline the concerns which we have, though I think they've been well articulated in the House anyhow, but good to get them on the record in the committee. I think there are two things I want to say. First of all, about the withdrawal agreement itself. The withdrawal agreement has caused huge concern amongst the Unionist community. Not as much concern amongst the business community as what one would have thought, given the implications which it has for business in Northern Ireland. But from a Unionist community point of view, to have Northern Ireland isolated in the way in which the withdrawal agreement does is very damaging to the Union. First of all, we would be subject to rules made in Brussels for a wide range of activities in Northern Ireland without any opportunity to have an input into them, without the UK government having an opportunity to have an input into them, and we would find ourselves increasingly removed from laws which are made in Westminster, superseded by laws made in Brussels. We would in effect become an annex of Brussels. And secondly, in the future, we would have to, as the Attorney General indicated, treat the rest of the United Kingdom as a third country when it came to trade. I mean, here we are, part of a country, and have to treat part of the major part of it, our major trading partner, by the way, as a third country, and the damage that would do to industry in Northern Ireland. Thirdly, of course, it would put a border down the Irish Sea, which would place, and the Chancellor has made it quite clear, that would place immense and costly administrative burdens on businesses in Northern Ireland, either bringing goods from GB, which is our main market, 60% of our trade is with GB, and with goods moving to GB. So that's the first thing. The second thing is the impact which this agreement will have on the Belfast Agreement. Now, the highlight has been that if we leave the EU, that the Belfast Agreement in some way is going to be diminished and it's going to affect community relations in Northern Ireland. The Belfast Agreement doesn't actually say anything about the border between Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic, but it does have a lot to say about the status of Northern Ireland as part of the United Kingdom, that it cannot be changed except with the consent of the people of Northern Ireland. And the withdrawal agreement certainly changes the constitutional status of Northern Ireland without the consent of the people of Northern Ireland. And therefore, if there's any threat to the Belfast Agreement, it's the withdrawal agreement and the impact that that's likely to have on relations within Northern Ireland.
Except the Ulster Farmers Union, the CBI, the FSB, the IOD, and the Northern Ireland Chamber of Commerce seem to rather like the withdrawal agreement. And,
I find that rather odd. I mean, let's just take the Ulster Farmers Union. The Ulster Farmers Union, if they had read the agreement, would actually find that state aid rules applying to Northern Ireland would mean that the EU, regardless of how the UK government wished to support agriculture in Northern Ireland, the EU could cap that support in accordance with what they saw as the appropriate policy. As far as businesses are concerned in Northern Ireland, I do find it very, very difficult to understand why any business in Northern Ireland, especially some of the major businesses who export all around the world, would wish to be excluded from UK trade deals in the future. And of course, under the withdrawal agreement, since we would remain as part of the customs territory of the EU, we would therefore not be able to participate, and indeed the Attorney General makes this clear as well in his advice, we would not be able to participate in trade deals which the UK would enter into with other parts of the world, and therefore would not have access to those markets. And, you know, from the consumer's point of view, and I notice Northern Ireland retailers have opposed or have supported the agreement as well, we could not benefit from any of the tariff reductions which the UK may negotiate with other parts of the world, so consumers would suffer as well.
Okay, thank you. Gregory Campbell.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Wilson, you're very welcome.
Thank you very much.
Just on to follow up what the Chair was alluding to, in terms of those groups, and the Chairman alluded to a number of them, who welcomed or embraced or gave their verdict in a positive sense to the withdrawal agreement. It seems to me that there is a view in Northern Ireland that many of those, like those groups and others who did so on the basis that they believed it's that or no deal, it's that or nothing, and therefore they did so on the basis of not that they endorsed it as a good deal, but that they couldn't see any other alternative.
Well, I think that there are two things. First of all, the leadership of those organisations, I'm not so sure reflects what their members would say in many occasions. I think that there was an element of it's this or no deal, but I would argue that a no deal would be better than this deal, because this deal, as I've said, draws a line between Northern Ireland and its main market in GB, with the costly administrative impact which that would have, would exclude Northern Ireland from participating in any trade deals which the United Kingdom would do with the rest of the world. And don't forget, we've got major exporters in Northern Ireland. We're a small country, so we don't really have a big local market. And, you know, we supply 40% of the world's aircraft seats. We supply 40% of stone crushing equipment in the world. We are a major exporter of aircraft parts. And in my own constituency, Caterpillar export generators all around the world, mostly to third world countries actually. So it's in the interests of Northern Ireland, major Northern Ireland firms, to be able to participate in the worldwide trade deals that the United Kingdom would enter. And, you know, for all of those reasons, I think there was a bit of a knee-jerk reaction by some of the business organisations, and had they given closer consideration to the proposal, they may have come to a different conclusion.
Okay. Lady Hermon.
Thank you very much, Stephen. Thank you so much for coming here to give us your, I was going to say words of wisdom, but your evidence, Sammy. First of all, can I just take you up on the assertion that somehow the withdrawal deal, the BrExit deal that the Prime Minister has negotiated, undermines the constitutional position of Northern Ireland? Of course it doesn't. It says within the withdrawal agreement that the consent principle of the Good Friday Agreement is in fact guaranteed. It's actually in black and white in page 307, I think. But what I want to ask you about, Sammy, is can we just tease out, I mean, you've repeated what we've known all along about the party's stance. However, there were some changes indicated by your good self last week. That was the 20th of February. You were reported, and I'm quoting here from the BBC, that the backstop could be agreeable provided it had a time limit. And I'm quoting what you actually said. The nature of the time limit would be very important. It can't be a long time in the distance.
Well, let me take up first of all on the assurances being given in the withdrawal agreement that the constitutional position of Northern Ireland cannot be changed and would not be changed. It is a fact that if we find ourselves in a situation where laws which would cover 60% of economic activity in Northern Ireland are no longer made either here in London or in Belfast, but in Brussels, and that is different from the rest of the United Kingdom, then constitutionally we are not in the same position as other parts of the United Kingdom. We are different than other parts of the United Kingdom, and in effect the focus of where lawmaking occurs for Northern Ireland would be outside the United Kingdom. So, I mean, the withdrawal agreement can use whatever words it wants. What you have to do is measure it against the facts, and the facts are that the withdrawal agreement makes it quite clear we would be part of the European customs territory, when the rest of the United Kingdom would not be, and we would be subject to EU EU single market rules when the rest of the United Kingdom would not be. So let me just do that. The second thing is...
the counter to that is that the constitutional position of Northern Ireland is guaranteed in the Northern Ireland Act of 1998, which implemented the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, that the future of Northern Ireland is in the hands of the people of Northern Ireland voting in the border poll. The constitutional status is not threatened, is not undermined by this deal. But you can move on to the second point, and that is the time frame.
Well, I mean, I don't want to emphasise the point, but since you've come back on it, let me just make it clear that if laws are made outside the United Kingdom, for a part of the United Kingdom, then that part of the United Kingdom has had its constitutional position changed by any definition, and therefore the terms of the Good Friday Agreement have been broken. Let me come to the backstop arrangement.
Yes, come to the backstop.
And the question that was asked was, would the DUP accept with the current withdrawal agreement? And I made it quite clear, no, we wouldn't. And secondly, what was the issue? And the issue was, first of all, the separate backstop arrangement for Northern Ireland, and the fact that the United Kingdom could not get out of those arrangements without the assent of the EU. And the point which I was making was that regardless of the mechanism, or regardless of the mechanism, the outcome was important, and the outcome was no longer would the EU be able to dictate to the United Kingdom the arrangements which would persist either between the United Kingdom as a whole or Northern Ireland and the EU. And the way of doing that was to have an end date for the backstop. Now, in effect, and you know, I'm only telling you what the EU have said and what the Irish government have said. Once you do that, you have removed the backstop. And the point I was making was the backstop could be removed if they didn't want to have the withdrawal agreement totally destroyed. You could remove the backstop by removing the time, by imposing a time limit on it. That, in effect, has it's the same outcome. There is no backstop, and that's what the EU has said. So,
how does the DUP feel about an enhanced arbitration mechanism to bring about an end to the backstop?
Well, that certainly is not a mechanism which we would accept. And I think for two reasons. I mean, first of all, why that leaves us in exactly the same position as the current withdrawal agreement does, where somebody else decides whether the United Kingdom can break out of the backstop or whether it stays in the backstop. I mean, this should be whether we decide to change or to change or alter the backstop should be, or alter any arrangements we have with the EU, should be the decision of this Parliament and this government, not some independent panel of judges. And I think that the second thing, an arbitration panel could drag on its deliberations for years.
So if that's what the Attorney General comes back with, Geoffrey Cox comes back with next week?
I think we have made it very clear that there has to be an ability for a sovereign Parliament and a sovereign government to make a decision about the future status of the United Kingdom as a whole in relation to the EU, or part of the United Kingdom in relation to the EU.
So are you and your colleagues prepared to risk the consequences of a no-deal Brexit?
Well, if there is if we finish up with a no deal, it will be as a result of the intransigence of the EU. I mean, we have made it quite clear all along, indeed the government has made it quite clear all along, that they wish to have a deal. But they have to have a deal which has the support of people in the House of Commons.
Sammy,
and you know, if you finish up with a majority of 230
I'm going to have
people,
to hurry.
if you finish up with a majority of 230 people saying this is a bad deal, then you really can't expect for the government to simply cave in because the alternative is no deal.
Sorry, this is a really serious issue. I mean, I'm going to quote from the head of the Northern Ireland Civil Service, a man of great stature and wisdom, David Sterling, who warned yesterday of the potentially, in his words, were grave consequences of a no-deal Brexit. And he said it could have, quote, a profound and long-lasting impact on society in Northern Ireland. Is that the risk that the DUP is prepared to take by no-deal?
First of all, I think you've got to look at the timing of this letter. This is a regurgitation of an earlier letter that he wrote. Secondly, it is, and I know that civil servants shouldn't get involved politically, but I have no doubt that this was written for a political motive. So you don't. Because he knew.
I'm going to leave it at that because we do need to move on, and that's on the record. I doubt there's going to be agreement on this point. I'm going to move to Ian Paisley.
Thank you. Good to see you here, Sammy. How did last week's actions by the Republic of Ireland make you feel when they seized boats from Northern Ireland?
Well, you know, this is the irony that we get the government in the Republic saying they don't wish to see a hard border. Yet they have threatened a hard border 5 miles up in the air when they said that they were going to stop planes flying across the Republic of Ireland, and now they're imposing a hard border in the sea, where they say where they have actually seized boats from Northern Ireland. And you know, this is the kind of one-sided nature of. We've got to be very careful in the future. On one hand, the Irish want access to Northern Ireland waters for their boats, but are quite happy to send gunboats, and that's how hard the border is in the sea, send gunboats to seize Northern Ireland boats which want to reciprocate and fish in their waters.
What would you say to those people who make the claim that Brexit would make a united Ireland more likely?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think that people who are using that, it's just part of the scare tactics which we have found being employed. Like we've got from David Sterling in his letter that it is a scare tactic, because if you look at the studies which have been made about the impact of a no deal. The impact. I don't care whether he's the head of the civil service or whether he's Santa Claus. It really doesn't matter. The fact of the matter is he has got it wrong, because even the studies which have been done on the impact of a no deal show that the overall impact, apart from the Treasury one, the overall impact between now and 2030 is likely to be a reduction in GDP of around between 2 and 3%. Now, mitigation measures by the government, it's been suggested, for example, if there was a fall of 2.2% over the 13 years, if the government decided to build another 30,000 houses per year, it would wipe out that impact on GDP. So the idea that somehow or other there's economic catastrophe around the corner, there may well be an impact of no deal, but government has got fiscal and monetary measures in which to deal with it. And indeed, we've got a good example of that. The Bank of England claimed that any negative impact that there may have been after the referendum vote was taken, and this is how they explained why all the forecasts were wrong, were eliminated by the quantitative easing that they undertook. So, I mean, there are ways in which, if there is some short-term disruption, that governments can...
Last week, Norway indicated that they'd set aside billions of pounds to invest in the United Kingdom post-Brexit because of the opportunities. Do you believe some of that could come to Northern Ireland? The sovereign, the Northern, Norway sovereign fund has invested heavily in the United Kingdom as a whole, and I have no doubt that if there are projects in Northern Ireland, some of them are public projects, some of them are private investments. If there are worthy projects in Northern Ireland, they a good return on them, of course. And finally, what do you think the Prime Minister means when she says that she wants to see legally binding changes to the treaty agreement?
Well, I hope that she means the same as we do, namely that
the agreement will be changed so that it is not possible for the United Kingdom to be held inside the EU after we have decided to leave. And those legally binding changes, as far as I'm concerned, have to ensure that we do not, the EU cannot use a withdrawal agreement to keep us in the customs union,
changes of
single
treaty
market,
level,
or Northern Ireland to do it differently.
not be changes at treaty level.
It would have to be changes in the treaty, because the treaty itself is legally binding, and if you're going to overcome the legally binding terms of the treaty at present, then you've got to have a change in the treaty.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Hoey, briefly.
Very briefly. It was mentioned, you mentioned the business community and the farmers and all, and being surprised how quickly they came out and supported the agreement. Is there any truth that actually those leaders probably even saw the withdrawal agreement before perhaps even members in this House saw it?
Well,
but there was some kind of approach to them to get them on board before it had even been formally published?
Well, I think that they were maybe given a presse of what was in the agreement, and a presse which was designed to play down the bad parts of it and emphasise the parts which the government thought might be attractive to them, and indeed skew it. The one thing I do know is that they did make their pronouncements before the 587-page document was actually available. So they must have made it on the basis of a briefing that they were given, and of course no one should ever do that, especially when one party has an interest in ensuring that the briefing is skewed in a certain way.
Okay, thank you.
Well, Mr. Wilson, I'm terribly sorry we've come to the end of our time. I think we really do have to crack on. So thank you so much for being with us. And we're very grateful. A busy Northern Ireland day.
Okay, thank you.
We'll crack on with Mr. Carroll. Yeah. Well, good morning, Mr. Carroll. Thank you for coming to see us, and thank you for stepping into the number 2 slot, because number 2 hasn't yet arrived. It's a pleasure to see you here. I wonder if you might like to give us a quick 3 minutes on where you and your party see the current issue in relation to Northern Ireland and the border.
Yes, thanks, Chair, and thanks for the invitation. I and people before profit believe in this whole debate and discussion, and indeed the negotiations around Brexit, that the concerns of people in the north of Ireland and the concerns of people that I represent in West Belfast in particular have been left firmly at the bottom of the pile. We've witnessed a cavalier attitude shown by the Tory government in its effort to do everything it can to ensure its backing from the DUP remains and it's kept in power. We saw ignorant comments from Tory MPs in particular, who do not understand the dangers and the reality of what a hard border would mean for people having to travel for work or to study. And I think such a dismissive attitude to the concerns about the re-erecting of borders and barriers is very, very concerning indeed to the people in the north. The freedom of movement to cross the border without any restrictions or without having to pass watchtowers or checkpoints is something that should be protected absolutely. And any attempt to mess around with this is tantamount, in my view, Chair, to playing with fire, and the people that do so will reap dangerous consequences. So in People Before Profit, we say not a hard border, no hard border on our watch. But when it comes down to it, though, amidst all the moves and machinations, Brexit is ultimately a battle between two bully boys, a battle between two imperial blocs. You see, on one hand, the likes of Jacob Rees-Mogg and the old Etonians who want to recreate the days of Rule Britannia, whilst not giving a damn about ordinary people and wouldn't think twice about erecting more restrictions on the right of people to move or work, not to mention welfare reform on top of that as well. But alongside that, you have aspirations from the EU to create an empire of its own through PESCO, through committing member states to spend a lot more of its spending on military operations, and eventually through the creation of a single European army. Not to mention the fact that they threatened that an economic time bomb would go off in Dublin if the banks weren't bailed out. So, Chair, in that context, People Before Profit won't be forced to say with any of the two bullies. We choose neither, and we say neither London nor Brussels, but we want to see a socialist Ireland ultimately. And our representatives in Dáil Éireann just yesterday have been seeking a cast iron guarantee from the Taoiseach to ensure that there is no hard border, and unfortunately the government didn't support that. So today, Chair, I'm here in my capacity as an MLA for West Belfast, and I can tell you that the people of West Belfast do not trust anyone in the Tory establishment. This BrExit process has indeed sped up the deep crisis in the British state and opened up the question of United Ireland. And in People Before Profit, we welcome the chance to have the opportunity to discuss this and present our own vision of a different type of Ireland. And this is a conversation that's already happening on the airwaves and in the newspapers. And it's not simply a process where all the Protestants are just going to vote to remain with the UK and all the Catholics are naturally going to vote for United Ireland. Things have become much more fluid than that. And despite, Chair, a certain level of uncertainty remaining, I welcome the fact that we can have a sensible, adult conversation about the future of this island and also what kind of state we want to live in. And one, in my view, which shouldn't be subservient to the corporations or elite. But ultimately, and just to conclude, Chair, for us and People Before Profit, to ensure a hard border isn't erected, we can't rely on the elites in London, Dublin or Brussels. For us, in our view, and People Before Profit, the only way that's going to be prevented and stopped is through people power and mass action on the streets.
Well,
so,
thank you very much indeed for all that. That's absolutely fascinating. Can I move to Maria Caulfield?
Thank you, Gerry. I know Brexit is obviously dominating the headlines, but can I just take things closer to home in terms of the Assembly? Mm-hmm. And obviously there's not a functioning Assembly at the moment, and here in Westminster yesterday we had to pass the budget bill. Today we've got more Northern Ireland legislation, which is quite controversial, and ideally we're better placed for those decisions were being taken in Northern Ireland. So can I ask what the People Before Profit responses into trying to get that Assembly back up and running? Is that something that as a party you're keen to do? Because we hear conflicting stories.
We're many of the discussions and negotiations about getting Stormont back together, for the most part, we have been excluded from them. I think there's an onus on the British government.
By who?
We've had, I think, in the space of 3 years, one meeting with the Secretary of State, and we've tried to set up more meetings and have more arrangements to discuss our perspective on it. So it's fundamentally a point of the views of parties like ourselves, smaller parties, but parties that are very relevant and have unique take on questions in Belfast and beyond, are being not listened to. So from our perspective, I think what happened was there was a situation where for too long Stormont was denying basic rights to people, be that Irish language rights, be that marriage equality rights, be that abortion rights, be it rights around the right to benefits and have a decent benefit system, the right to a fair and decent wage. So all those things were not supported or neglected, and there was no action on those issues for a long time. I think when we saw the latest deal, I think it was 2017, the latest deal to try and get Stormont back together, even that deal, which didn't really have much by way of concrete detail about confirming an Irish Language Act, was not enough. It was too much rather for the DUP to support. So I mean, what I'm hearing on the ground is mixed messages. People are obviously fed up with politicians not being in Stormont and not sort of doing what they're supposed to do in terms of being elected, but also people, especially in West Belfast where I'm an elected representative, people are very concerned about the denial of rights. So I think any Stormont which is to be returned has to, at the very bare minimum, respect the rights of those people who have been ignored for so long.
If there was a proposal to re-establish an assembly of the willing, so the parties willing to get back round the table and willing to set up the assembly again. Would the People Before Profit Party be willing to sit round the table?
Well, I'd be concerned that there's attempts to try and circumvent those issues that, like I talked about, Irish Language Act, marriage equality, abortion rights, and those issues. So I wouldn't be prepared, and obviously it's an issue for the party as a whole, but I wouldn't be prepared to join an executive or jump in with the resurrected Stormont Assembly that continues to deny those people basic rights.
Okay, so just one quick follow-up on that, because obviously here we're starting to scrutinise devolved matters such as health and education. We're hearing firsthand from teachers, from health professionals, that because there isn't an assembly, it's, people in Northern Ireland are being left behind. And for someone whose family came from a nationalist community and who, my grandfather didn't have voting rights, for example, it's heartbreaking to see that those communities that have elected representatives are either not coming here to take their seats or are not being represented in the Assembly. What's your feeling on that? There are people being denied representation because politicians simply can't come together.
And people are being denied basic rights, they're not being listened to. And just on the question of health and education, I mean, obviously there is a crisis. I think last week from a representative on this committee about that. Health, there's a crisis. There's too many people on waiting lists, waiting for operations, waiting to get treated. But that predated Stormont not sitting, and unless Stormont is going to sort of reinvest and invest more in health and education, then those issues aren't going to be resolved.
MLAs like yourself, do you not feel some responsibility that while there is not an assembly, that these issues are getting worse for people in Northern Ireland?
Well, not me, I mean, I'm a socialist MLA, one single socialist MLA, and I'm on a picket line defending the health service and defending schools, so I don't feel any responsibility whatsoever about schools and hospitals being downgraded and being cut back and being restricted, so I don't feel any responsibility whatsoever for that.
I'm going to give brevity. Kate Hoey.
Thank you. Nice to see you. And I just wondered, if the withdrawal agreement, let's get back to Brexit, if the withdrawal agreement doesn't go through and there is, by one means or another, we leave on WTO rules, who's going to put up the hard border?
Well, I saw no clear evidence from the British government that they would absolutely rule out a hard border, so I think that has to be emphasised. We saw in the last few days, obviously, the Taoiseach mentioning about armed guards on the border, and that's obviously very, very concerning and very, very worrying. So regardless of where it comes from, be it Britain, be it the Republic of Ireland, our perspective in People Before Profit is we don't want to see any hard border or any beefing up of that border, because it will change people's lives, it will make people's lives worse, and it's something that we want to encourage not to happen, and implore for it not to happen. But if it does happen, then we're encouraging peaceful civil disobedience on the streets to stop that from taking place.
But the common travel area won't change, so people aren't going to, just people moving around aren't going to be affected in the slightest by Brexit, are they?
Well, we don't know. I mean, I
the common travel area was there long before we joined the common.
Indeed, but I not want to trust the Tory government, so I can't take it for granted that there's going to be no attempts from London to try and.
So basically, you don't believe the British government or the Irish government or the European Union when they say that they don't want a hard border and that they're not going to put one up.
We can't rely on any of them. In our perspective and our position, my position, and People Before Profit is not to rely on any of the elites, like I said, in London, Dublin or Brussels. So we want to ensure that it doesn't happen, but we can't trust them, and I think they're willing to go to any lengths to protect their single market or to protect the union with Northern Ireland. So it could come from any of those different directions, and we would be very, very concerned that it could potentially happen.
So you don't really respect any politicians?
I don't respect. Don't get the question, sorry.
Sorry, you don't have any faith or any respect in any politicians of any party other than presumably your own?
Well, I can disagree, obviously, with many politicians, and most do, but the question is, do I trust them? Do I trust the Tory government? No, I don't.
Okay, thank you.
Ian Paisley.
Gerry, nice to meet you. I admire your scepticism, if nothing else. You believe, and you've articulated earlier, about your desire and your ambition, legitimate enough, to see a socialist Ireland. Should that socialist Ireland be in or outside of the EU?
Ultimately, I think we can't have an Ireland which is beholden to any empire. So be it the British Empire, be that the burgeoning and growing EU empire, which both have, I mean, the British elements of, I said obviously Jacob Rees-Mogg, elements within the British establishment want to recreate that rule Britannia, that British Empire. But also, like I said, we have attempts to create a single European army. We saw comments from Angela Merkel.
So you'd want
Macron.
that socialist Ireland to be outside of the EU?
Ultimately, yeah.
Ultimately, yes. I mean, that's a classic socialist position. It was a position articulated by Tony Benn and by others in the Clash Front. Do you think Republicans and socialists in Northern Ireland who have campaigned for Remain, that they've sold the pass on that issue?
Well, there's certainly there is a very honourable critique of the European Union from the left. It's something that, as you say, Tony Benn and others had a very strong critique of it for denial of democracy and all the rest of it. So I think that's the correct socialist position to take. Yep. And obviously others, unfortunately, didn't take that position.
If a man come from West Belfast, were you surprised, for example? I mean, Sinn Féin during previously had opposed Lisbon, had opposed Maastricht, had opposed the EU. Were you surprised whenever they decided to throw their lot in and campaign for a Remain vote?
Not really, to be honest with you, because they've kind of in the 80s and 90s certainly they had positions that were considered of the left, and they kind of moved more and more to the centre ground. So in some ways it surprised me, in some ways it didn't, to be honest with you.
Do you think, as the Republic of Ireland is currently constituted, that they would be better, and the people of the Republic of Ireland would be better if they were to have politicians who would lead them out of Europe as it's currently constituted?
Say the question again, sorry.
Do you think that the people of the Republic of Ireland would be better placed if they had politicians and leaders in the Republic today as it's currently constituted to lead them out of the EU?
Like I said, our position in People Before Profit, we're a 32 county party. We have TDs in Dáil Éireann, councillors in the south, and obviously MLA and councillors in the north. So I think we need to look at this on an island-wide basis and understand.
I accept your island-wide analysis, and I think it's fair, and you've articulated that view that if we were all as one nation, your ideal would be that we'd be outside the EU because that's an imperial power. Do you think, however, as we're currently constituted, the Republic of Ireland should try to remove itself from the EU also?
I think that's ultimately, if we're talking about having an Ireland which is not dominated by corporations or elite, I think ultimately it has to be one which isn't dominated or ruled by Brussels.
Gerry, thank you very much.
Lady Hermon.
Thank you very much indeed for coming here and giving us your evidence. I was very struck that in fact you had a prepared statement which you read into the evidence early this morning. And there are a number of striking, to put it mildly, statements, but you had obviously thought about them because they were in your statement that you read out to us. So could I just ask you just to elaborate a little? Towards the end, you said that a hard border would have dangerous consequences. What exactly did you mean by that?
Well, we saw reports in the media that a hard border could potentially lead to an increase in violence, and that would be something I would, and People Before Profit would be totally 100% opposed to.
This is violence from the new IRA, the dissident Republicans?
Potentially. We saw reports in the BBC and stuff, I'm sure you've saw it yourself,
yes,
that sort of referenced that either directly, yes, or indirectly. And I think it's something very, very dangerous, and like I said, it's tantamount to playing with fire if people think that they can erect more checkpoints or more customs or more security on the border. So it's not the words of me, it's the words of others, but I think it's going to have very, very grave consequences on people's lives, not just in that context, in that very, very potentially serious, dangerous context, but also the fact that people will be restricted in terms of their ability to move across the border. If they're from Donegal, yes, and they want to study in Derry, or if they're in Derry they want to go to Donegal, people's lives could be, but shouldn't be restricted by any potential creation or reinforcement of a
yes,
border.
So you would agree with the PSNI Chief Constable that a hard border would be seen as, quote, fair game for attack by violent dissident Republicans?
It could be, yeah.
You also said, and this is the other statement that in fact I just want you to elaborate upon because it sounded a little bit like a threat but let's see what you really meant by it. You said that it could result, that Brexit could result, and a hard border could result in mass action on the streets. Do you want to read that bit back again? I'm quoting you directly.
I mean it directly, and it's not just my view. I think it's going to happen. It's the head of Cooperation Ireland said civil disobedience was his exact quote. There'll be civil disobedience if there's a no deal and potentially a hard border. So I have no doubt about it. Whether I say it or not, whether there's going to be, if there is restrictions on the freedom of movement of people in the north to the south or south to the north, there's going to be civil disobedience on the streets. There's going to be protests. And just to clarify, from our perspective, we want that to be peaceful. We want that to be people coming out in a people power type festival, type atmosphere, where people are taking to the streets and saying we will not accept this, but not violent in any way or form.
And the civil disobedience that you're talking about, do you expect that to be confined to the border area, or are you talking about West Belfast? Are you talking about West Belfast?
I would imagine it would be across the island. You know, I can't obviously predict, but I'm speaking to people north and south, people in Derry, people in Dublin, people across the south and across the north. I would imagine it would be not just on the border area, it would be right across the island, because people don't want to go back to the days where they were restricted, where they had checkpoints where they could move freely across the border. So I have no doubt in my mind if there's any attempt to restrict that, then there will be big numbers of people out in the streets to defy that.
And is that your party policy? Will your party, I mean, you've indicated that in fact you have members that sit in the Dáil, you have them in councils in the Republic of Ireland, and you obviously hopefully sit one of these days again in the Assembly when it's functioning again. Will you be calling on people?
We will absolutely call for people to take to the streets peacefully and protest against any erection of a hard border.
Right. I'm trying to absorb that. Let's hope we can avoid all of that. Let's avoid a no-deal Brexit, and let's avoid a hard border at all costs. You also mentioned, and again I'm quoting from what you said earlier, and that was that Brexit has opened up the question, your words, opened up the question of a united Ireland. Mm-hmm. Why do you say that?
Well, first of all, like I said in my statement, it's all over the news, pretty much every day or every other day. It's in the newspapers. I mean, even people I'm speaking to, you're from traditionally Unionist backgrounds, if you want to use that sort of terminology, are looking at the possibility of United Ireland, because for different reasons, because they think that London is denying them what they see as their rights, be it as European citizens or people who support the European Union, or generally that sort of cavalier attitude that the Tory government has taken to people in West Belfast and across the north. I mean, we held a meeting recently in Queen's University on the issue of United Ireland and Brexit in United Ireland, and there was over 150 people there.
And was that a mixed
audience, a mixed panel? It was ourselves, and there was Unionists on it, and I'm assuming the audience was obviously mixed as well.
Yes.
But you wouldn't have had that 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago of that sort of capacity. So it's a live debate. It's something that's happening, and I think from our perspective we want to conduct it in a way that's not just from a certain community will vote a certain way, from another community will vote a certain way. It's opened up the possibility of talking about a new, different type of Ireland, and that's one in our view that should be one which respects women's rights, which respects refugees, which respects all sorts of people in society who are downtrodden and oppressed. So it's a debate that's already happening.
So in your estimation, Brexit has been very divisive and polarising?
I mean...
Or do you think it has sort of liberated people to think differently?
I mean, it's a mess. I mean, what the Tories are doing is a mess, and like I said in the statement as well, there's obviously a lot of uncertainty, there's a lot of fear, and that's real. But there is a possibility of having a conversation, like I said, about politics across the island, and that's welcome. Whilst the other stuff that's came alongside that isn't.
Thank you very much.
Gerry, very welcome. It's good to hear when obviously we come from different backgrounds, but in your introductory remarks, you talked about that you represent communities that believe passionately that they're being denied a series of rights. So it's very good to come into contact with me as an elected representative who represents people who feel exactly the same way and have done so for generations. Denied rights, right to live, right passport rights, job rights, a whole series of other rights. So it's a good interaction. But in your introductory remarks, you talked this issue of a hard border. You referred, I wrote down carefully what you'd said. You talked about the concept of watchtowers and checkpoints. Am I right in assuming that phrase was used in the context of a possible hard border? Is that what you would construe as being a hard border?
Well, it could be that. It could be more guards. It could be armed guards. It could be more officials on the border. I mean, it could be a range of different things, but that could be potentially what a hard border could look like as well.
I mean, I don't want to be pejorative here, but everybody that we've heard from and have heard of and watched and listened to and read, whether it's Michel Barnier, Tusk, Leo Varadkar, Theresa May, parties in Northern Ireland, everybody everywhere that I've read of has said that there's not going to be what you fear is going to happen.
Well, I said in my previous comments that I wouldn't trust, frankly, the Tory government. I wouldn't trust the elites in Brussels. And also, we saw this week attempts to have armed guards from the south on the border as well. So, I mean, we're opposed to any attempts to put in more personnel, more checkpoints, more guards, more police on the border, because it restricts people's right to move freely. So wherever it potentially could come from, we're opposed to it no matter what.
But if there's no intention to have that, and there doesn't appear to be from anyone anywhere, what apart from a media-inspired campaign and some politicals piggybacking on that, why would people believe this nonsense about watchtowers and checkpoints? There's not going to be any. So why do people believe that there might be?
Potentially there could be, and we hear talk of your colleague previously saying about we want a border, the issue of a hard border. We can't. Leo Varadkar has said just previously 2 days ago that they're going to look at putting armed guards on the border. So you're saying it's coming from nowhere, which isn't correct. Your point, I'm assuming you're trying to make is that your point you're trying to make is that you're claiming, or you can give a cast iron guarantee that it's not going to come from the British government. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I mean, the Taoiseach has been very clear all along. Whenever there were rumours about special provisions being made amongst the revenue commissioners, he said no, there's not. And then there was a leaked report that the Irish Army had done a whole series of estimates of how many border crossings there were around the border, and did that mean that there was going to be a move towards infrastructure? And he said no, there's no question of that, we're not going to do that. He's repeatedly said that, as has everyone else.
Yeah, but also, like I said, 2 days ago, there's talk of him saying, or a statement from the Dáil anyway, saying that there's going to be armed personnel on the border. Also, there was a meeting in Davos 3 weeks ago where he was telling the rich and the wealthy of the world that there indeed might have to be patrols on the border as well. So it could happen, and unless you're giving me a guarantee that it's not going to come from the Tory government, potentially it could happen there as well to maintain its relationship and its government with yourselves.
Well, I don't know that anybody's in the sort of territory of guarantees. I'm more in the territory of dismissing it as a ludicrous proposition. Couldn't work, and nobody's prepared to implement. But let's say you had these watchtowers and checkpoints that somebody from somewhere is going to implement, and personnel from somewhere are going to be recruited that nobody seems to know about. Have you been on the border much in the past few years?
I've travelled regularly from Belfast to Dublin,
yeah. But I mean, apart from the sort of main routes, there are main crossing points, but the 280 other crossing points?
I haven't been around the 280 crossing points.
Right. But I don't think anybody would suggest that this hard border would be constructed in such a way as all these crossing points would be manned by thousands of individuals, wherever they're going to come from. Has anybody suggested that to you?
Well, there's speculation, obviously, about the potentiality of a hard border. And like I say, our position is we're opposed to it. You know, how that would work potentially, theoretically, it's not for me to say because I'm fundamentally opposed to it happening as well. But even if you're on a bus down to Dublin, people are stopped regularly on that bus. People, if they're perceived to be a refugee or perceived to be a migrant.
Yeah, that's now.
That's happening now.
Yeah, that's right. So without any hard border.
Without any hard border. But potentially, could that happen again? Could that be increased? Could that be extended to people in the north? It's speculation. I don't have, and you don't have any guarantees you can give me here today, but I would be opposed to that. Any attempt to beef up that border or to have more checkpoints.
Right. If to try and move on to the future now,
Very briefly.
If we got to a position quite rapidly, one hopes that there was some form of revised agreement in terms of a withdrawal agreement that allowed the UK, including Northern Ireland, to leave as they voted, to leave the EU. What would your position then be if on March the 29th or a short time thereafter the UK leaves under an agreement process and this mythical hard border disappears into the mists of time from where it never should have emerged? What would your position then be, and say in a few months' time?
So, position on a potential agreement that potentially might be agreed?
No, say there was an agreement and the UK, including Northern Ireland, leaves the EU. What's your position then in relation to the border that remains unchanged as it is now?
Well, we're opposed to the border as is, in terms of...
Even as it is at the moment?
Well, we don't want to see a border. We don't want to see people in Ireland divided, north and south, and we believe that the border has done that. It was an undemocratic move to divide people in the north and south. It created two states in the south, one state in the south which was dominated by conservative Catholicism, and a state in the north which entrenched sectarianism. So we want to see an end of that and a new dispensation, a new island, and a new type of politics which doesn't dominate or be dominated by corporations or the rich. So we're opposed to any hard border, but also we're opposed to that division on the island of Ireland.
Okay, so you would override the wishes of the majority of the
people? No, we would have a debate and a discussion on it. We're a Democrat.
All right, that's great. Very briefly, Nigel Mills.
Thank you, Mr. Carroll. Your main concern is about infrastructure at the border and checks there. You're not worried about random compliance processes for moving goods around if you have to do them online in your factory or something. That's not a concern to you. It's just stuff.
Well, it would be as well. I was speaking to a man in my constituency recently who's being told he has to have a green card to travel south. He's a businessman, and that's going to incur a lot of money potentially for him to travel to the south. So I'd be concerned about that as well, that people are being forced to have extra documentation, pay more to travel somewhere where they very much travel freely as it is.
But you don't think you'll get mass peaceful protests about there's too much customs compliance required now? That sort of protest is about...
It's hard to say. People don't want to see their life disturbed as it is, and any more regulation, any more checkpoints, any more fees that people have to pay to travel what they're travelling and the distance they're travelling now is something that people do not want to see. Whether they will protest in big numbers against that or not, it's hard for me to predict or say, but people do not certainly want to see it.
Mr. Carroll, thank you very much indeed for being with us today. We're very grateful for your evidence.
Thank you.
Get my glasses.
Hello. Well, Ms. Bailey, good morning. Thank you very much indeed for coming to see us today. I think you probably got a flavour of what this session is about from sitting in the audience. But we are essentially engaged in a piece of work, as you would expect, to look at the border dimension of BrExit. and this is an ongoing piece of work, will be subject to a series of reports, and I have no doubt that the evidence you'll give to us today will enlighten us and illuminate our proceedings. So can I invite you for 3 minutes or so just to give us a quick rundown on how you and your party see the current issues surrounding Brexit and the border?
The current issues are very, very real and very wide. I think it is really, really important for the committee and for the government here to understand that while we have had a 20-year peace process so far, I would argue that we have actually instead seen a political process over a peace process, and peace in Northern Ireland has not yet been realised. So the border issue that has been brought into focus through Brexit has to be understood in a very emotional and lived experience context, wider than trade agreements or customs borders. It's in living memory of people, and that is very, very easy to stir emotive images and memories for people. So that is a very real concept that I think that really does need to be understood. The debates that I've heard around the border so far have focused on trade and the moving of goods, but we haven't heard very much about the moving of people and the freedom of people to travel, and especially those border communities who do this on a daily basis. The Good Friday Agreement, or Belfast Agreement if you prefer, is a legally binding international treaty, and Brexit was an advisory opinion poll. There is no legal basis for Brexit, and I think that it has to be understood as well that 2 devolved regions within the United Kingdom voted to remain, one being Northern Ireland, the other Scotland, and the population split almost down the middle. But what we're hearing is that we're going ahead with Brexit because the people spoke. Well, the people divided, really, and it depends on how you want to divvy up those numbers. So for Northern Ireland, the region who voted to remain, to be facing the consequences of Brexit, they feel that they're being brought out against their will, and this is contrary to the Good Friday Agreement, which is a legally binding agreement. It has brought up an awful lot of issues in terms of citizenship for people. There was the belief that it was set within the Good Friday Agreement that people's constitutional or identity status, they could be Irish, they could be British, or they could be both. And many were happy with that. But since the border and Brexit has come on board, people are now starting to look at what that is. I'm hearing stories from my constituents. One family who the mother is born in the Republic of Ireland, her partner is Bulgarian, and their child is born in Northern Ireland, and the problems that they're having. So her mother is elderly, she has to travel regularly to look after her, but because she has lived and worked and owns property in Northern Ireland, is being told that she no longer has proper full domiciliary rights in the Republic of Ireland, and therefore is being prevented from accessing services, but yet her daughter can still access free education at a university in Scotland, and her husband, who is Bulgarian, has settled status. So within one family, that brings a lot of issues into play. Another man in my constituency, who is married to a Spanish woman whose children are born in Northern Ireland, phoned the Home Office to ask what would be the conditions for his children, and he was told that they would have to apply for settled status. This was later revoked by the Home Office, and they said that they were wrong and asked if the children had Northern Irish passports. So there is an awful lot of confusion, there is a lot of misinformation, there is no concrete proposals coming out. The government, we keep hearing what everybody doesn't want. They don't want a hard border, that they don't want the worst outcomes, but yet we're not hearing what will be put, what will be agreed, and what can get through this House. So the border issue is very real. We will be facing the worst impacts of Brexit if we are to face a no deal, and that looks ever more increasingly likely. And I believe that the head of the civil service is going to be briefing all the parties. I got a letter yesterday from him to set out the consequences to Northern Ireland if we are to face a no Brexit deal. So it's very real, and our position is that there should be no border in Ireland at all, because we have not yet realised peace, and it is the responsibility of this government and the Secretary of State to do everything possible to try and get the Assembly and an executive formed up and going, because to date no real effort has been made on that one at all. So to have Brexit forced upon the people when we have no say and no representation is just a step too far.
Thank you. The customs union is a first world hedge against a first world hedge against cheap produce from the developing world. It exercises that through tariffs and quotas. Clearly that has an impact upon poor people worldwide. Would you agree with that? And if you do agree with it, presumably you'll oppose the customs union.
No, I don't oppose the customs union. I don't think that there should be any change in Northern Ireland. To make any changes in Northern Ireland, you are risking the stability. And I will go back to the point that we have had a political process over a peace process. So the people in Northern Ireland are feeling very, very disillusioned and very distrustful and mistrustful of this government, because the Good Friday Belfast Agreement has not been fully implemented. So to come and trying to make changes for the conditions of people in Northern Ireland, whether that be taking us out of a customs union, regulatory alignments, or putting borders in place, or restricting citizenship to the European Union, is not something that we should be pushing.
Yes, well, to be
and for third
clear,
world countries, as you're calling them, or developing countries, and poverty in those. We have poverty in Northern Ireland. We have so many people in Northern Ireland who are living under the basic living income. We have had so little investment in Northern Ireland, and the investment that I am seeing being touted for Northern Ireland is not conducive to a stable economy. So we need to be looking at our own people. So a customs union needs to stay. We need access to those European markets. We need access to our neighbours, to the south and the north. We need that free trade, and we are so intrinsically linked that it's hard to see how you can take us away from that.
So it's clear you're content that the European Union should continue to subjugate the world's poorest. Can I press you on another element of the European Union, which is
that's your words, not mine.
Which is permanent structure. Well, that's the natural consequence of the customs union. Can I press you on another element of the European Union, which is, of course, permanent structured cooperation? Is your party permanent structured cooperation? Is your party for or against permanent structured cooperation?
In what context? Sorry.
Well, you know what permanent structured cooperation is?
No.
Well, it's the creation of a European defence identity. That is to say, a European Union army.
There is no European Union army that I'm aware of, is there?
There is a European army in embryonic form, and the proposal is that it should be expanded and that there should be a permanent command structure, which would presumably be something that your party would be opposed to.
Of course we would. We're a party of peace and non-violence.
Right. Okay. All right. Thank you. Jim Shannon.
Clare, nice to have you at the committee, along with all the other ones before and those to follow. The issue of the border, and I'm very conscious of our time, so I'll try to adhere to the time scale that the Chair has indicated. The Republic of Ireland don't want a hard border. The EU don't want a hard border. The United Kingdom government don't want a hard border. Are you of the same opinion?
Of course.
Yeah. So if we're all agreed that we don't need a hard border, then whenever we leave the EU on the 29th of March, because that's what we're referring to, then there'd be no need for anything more restrictive than what there's been before. Would that be right?
Well, that's what we're all hoping to hear. We haven't heard how that's going to be implemented. We haven't heard how that's going to operate, and we haven't heard how that's going to be rolled out. So while we are hearing that nobody wants one, we're not hearing how that's going to be managed, and that's what the people need to hear.
I think the point I'm trying to make, Clare, is that if all those different governments and institutions as they are saying that there's no need for a hard border, then their commitment to not having a hard border is apparent through the words that they have spoken. So if that's the case, then there shouldn't be any worries for anyone for having untold restrictions in the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland in the future. The point I'm trying to make is, if that's the case, then we shouldn't have anything to fear from leaving the EU. Would that be right?
That's the question that this government need to come forward and answer. If we are leaving the European Union, if we are coming out of the customs union, if we're going to set up World Trade Organization or do deals with other countries around the world, then you have to check the movement of goods somewhere. So we need to know what those arrangements are going to be. If it's not going to be on a hard border, on a customs setup, then we would like to hear from you what it's going to be.
Yeah, I think we certainly through the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee have had some indications of methodologies of doing the movement of border. Just a quick example, in my constituency I have a fairly large agri-food sector. They have 2 factories in Northern Ireland, 2 factories in the Republic of Ireland. Their products cross the border 3 times. Their technical measures, they're recorded as a there's no reason why they could not be the methodology to continue as they do now for the future. The point I'm really getting to, Clare, is that there's nothing to fear from leaving the EU if it doesn't affect the border situation as it is now. And all the indications coming from everyone at this moment in time seem to be along those lines. Nothing to fear.
So on the island of Ireland, if there's going to be different for the agri-food sector, as you've identified already, there are serious concerns coming up from those within the sector and farmers as well. So if we have to then, to allow the free movement across the island, if there are farms on the border, if there is produce and products and goods and services moving around freely, then it's going to have to be checked somewhere, because to leave then the UK area and move into an EU area, it's going to have to be checked.
Yeah, but
correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, yeah, but what I'm trying to suggest to you, I'm not just suggesting this is a factual, evidential base. This is coming from the CEO of Lakeland Dairies, Michael Hanley, says, and he's the man at the top of the tree. He says that when we leave the EU, we will deal with that system as it is. Nothing will change. There'll be an administrative methodology put in place to ensure that the products can cross the border. Again, it goes back to the point, we can always have a reason for saying no to something, but whenever we have solutions, the solutions have to be accepted as well. And there are solutions. And by the way, just for the record, I'm a member of the Ulster Farmers Union. They certainly don't speak for me, and nor do they speak for my neighbours either, just to have that on record. Because there's many of us are Brexiteers and feel that leaving would be for the best. So what we're saying is that we can do all these things and they can happen. And whenever the people in charge of companies who will be in the middle of any difficulties, if there was any difficulties, say there's nothing to fear from it, then I would suggest to you there is nothing to fear from it.
Okay, well, there's the other big dairies that you're talking about are setting up factories and premises on both sides of the border now, so that they will be able to continue doing their business. And I think that's really unfair when you start to then go not at the top but to the bottom, to the farmers who don't have the huge big industry behind them, who are not at the top of the tree. Think of the ones at the bottom of the tree. They need to be able to afford or survive any extra costs coming onto their business.
With great respect, Lakeland Dairies represent somewhere in excess of 200 farming families across the whole of Northern Ireland. Their employment goes even beyond that to as much as maybe 500 or 600. So under no illusions, if the CEO speaks for a firm, he's not speaking for himself at the top of the tree in a warm office. He's speaking because he knows how that system works, and he is also speaking for all those dairymen who put their milk into his product. Yep. Let's be, there's lots of positives and there's ways of doing things, is a point I'm coming to. That's very good.
Lady Hill.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Chairman. And thank you very much indeed, Clare, for coming this morning. Clare, in your evidence, you sounded very critical of the preparations, or perhaps I should say the lack of preparations, for EU citizens who are living and have lived for a considerable period of time in Northern Ireland and have integrated in Northern Ireland, have worked in Northern Ireland. So what more would you like to see done by the civil service in Northern Ireland and indeed by the Home Office?
I'd like to see real, proper, practical information coming for them. We're sitting here just a few weeks
Yes,
from
we
the
are.
exit date,
Yes.
and this is people's lives that we're talking about. I had a friend who left Northern Ireland last Thursday. Her mother and herself have been living and working and studying in Northern Ireland for a considerable length of time. They couldn't get any straight answers, and they decided that this wasn't a place for them, and they left last Thursday. And this is not an isolated incident. They just can't get proper information, and therefore cannot plan for their futures, and we're weeks away from this. So when when they contact the Home Office, for example,
Yes.
the Home Office are very confused in the evidence and the information that they're giving out. They still talk about a Northern Irish passport, for example, and this is not okay. On top of that, we are having people with families, with children in schools, with jobs, with property, with mortgages, who don't know where they're going to be in a few weeks because information hasn't been given to them.
So the problem is with the Home Office,
Yeah,
and lack of information and lack of understanding of the basic facts in Northern Ireland.
That's one issue, certainly.
Yes.
And the Home Office do not deal with me as an MLA. The Home Office will always tell me to refer to an MP. So even if I contact the Home Office to try and get information on behalf of people, I'm shut down from accessing information from them as well.
That's ridiculous.
It's always been.
It's ridiculous. What about local information from the departments? From, as I say, I mean, surely to goodness, meetings have been organised. I am aware that meetings have been organised from Queen's to talk about EU rights. And have you been able to attend those? And were those helpful?
Yeah, many organisations and charities and people working within those sectors or for those communities are doing as much as they can to get out there, but it goes back to the point that we still don't have any agreed outcome. We still don't know what's happening at the other side of the 29th of March. So therefore we can only give supposition, we can only give hypothetical, we can tell people to prepare for everything, but we don't know what's actually coming. So that's a huge burden to be putting on an individual and a huge cost as well.
Yes. So you're really calling for what in particular? Better information from the Home Office?
Decision making to be made, we can't wait until the D-Day. We need people to be ready.
As a matter of urgency?
Yeah.
You've also said in your evidence that, and I listened very carefully to how you described it, you said the border issue has to be understood in a very emotional context, that it stirs memories and emotions. And it does stir memories and emotions for a great many people. The people that you speak for, the people that you're speaking with, is it an anxiety that they have that we're going to go back to bad old days? There's
a whole myriad of conversations and thoughts and memories being provoked, but it comes, right down to the very daily practical. People living in the border regions, people whose land or farms or work, business, school and family life cross that border several times. Some people up to 20 times a day. They're going from home to work to schools to shops. So it comes to that very practical, to, it can go up to others who are very resilient and resistant to a border, but it's everything in between as well, Lady Sylvia, to be honest. So it's a whole raft of things, but again, I think that it's the lack of clarity and the fact that there is a very strong opposition to the fact that the Good Friday Agreement, the Belfast Agreement, has not been realised over 20 years. We are still struggling to have the full implementation of that while we are facing the impact of BrExit, which is not a legally binding referendum.
In your view?
Thank you very much, Ian Paisley.
Yes, Clare, did I hear you right? At the end of your introduction you said, and I wrote it down, you said there should be no border at all in Ireland. That's your position?
Yep.
You accept that is completely contrary to the Belfast Agreement?
Well, if Brexit is going to be bringing the border...
but that position, there should be no border at all in Ireland, that is completely contrary to the Belfast Agreement.
Okay, well, we've got a seamless one, correct me then.
No, we
would like to maintain a seamless border then, I'll change that.
We have a de facto border and a de jure border. There's a real border in Ireland. We have a customs border in terms of our currency and in terms of our VAT and our trade relationship.
Well, I'll change my words, Mr Paisley, too. There should be no hardening of the existing border then.
The existing border, okay, because that would have changed things quite dramatically. In the absence of an assembly, How should Northern Ireland's voice be represented in what's left of the current negotiations and perhaps in future negotiations on the issue to do with Europe and Northern Ireland?
That's a great question, because Brexit is going to be decided here at Westminster, where your party are the only party outside of Lady Sylvia Hermon, who's an independent, who take their seats. So we have Sinn Féin now elected, and they don't take their seats, so we don't have that voice either.
Do you think Sinn Féin should be here and take their seats?
I'm not here to speak for Sinn Féin, so please don't ask me those questions. You can ask them directly. But we are only hearing...
I must say thank you for coming, because they won't come and even answer questions like this.
Well, thank you for the invite, because it's more than I've ever had from the Northern Ireland office of the Secretary of State as well. So that causes a problem to the question that you've already posed as well. You know?
I overwhelmed with thank yous.
Unanimity on that.
So it'd be good if maybe the Secretary of State would engage in Northern Ireland and maybe be present and hear voices from right across the elected spectrum in Northern Ireland. I think that would be a really good and positive start to hearing what our input for Brexit would be.
Obviously, ideally, if the Assembly was up and running, that voice could be heard at local level in terms of the myriad of voices that are represented from Northern Ireland. Are you hopeful that the Assembly will be back this year?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Paul Bew, one of the authors and advisors to David Trimble in terms of the Belfast Agreement, he takes the opposite view to you in terms of the interpretation that the withdrawal agreement that Theresa May brought forward. He says that that's the thing that actually undermines the Belfast Agreement, not Brexit. And he spells it out very clearly, because it changes the status of Northern Ireland, because Europe would be imposing rules and changes on Northern Ireland that we would have no say in, whereas currently in terms of the Belfast Agreement we do have a say in all of those things. Do you accept his interpretation?
Well, I believe the Lord Trimble is to test that in court. Correct me if I'm wrong on that one again, so I'll wait the court outcome on that one. But again, I'll go back to what I've said, that Brexit is not conducive to the Good Friday Agreement in any way, shape or form. They both cannot coexist, and we would like to see the full implementation of the legally binding international treaty that is the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. So our position is that the withdrawal agreement with the protocol for Northern Ireland and the backstop is the best of worst outcomes that we could have hoped for.
Thank you, Clare.
Gregory Campbell, very briefly.
Thank you, Chair. You talked, Clare, about the issue of the hardening of the border. Do you accept or believe some of these wilder stories about what it might constitute? We've read about, even though everybody denies there's going to be any structures on the border. Taoiseach has done that, the Prime Minister has done it, Europe has done it, everybody has done that. But there still seems to be this ongoing, recurrent theme that there could be a hard border. What's your view?
Well, my view is that I would like yourselves and this government to come forward and tell us how that will be, because we're not hearing any information. So if there is a no deal, we are weeks away from the 29th of March and no agreement has been made. The legal deadlines are rapidly passing. Every debate that comes up is a U-turn somewhere. Everybody's changing their position. So it's very hard for me to sit and tell you what the reaction from those in Ireland, north or south, is going to be. What we need is information.
Yeah, but everybody involved in the process, all the negotiators, have all sought to give reassurances, for whatever reason, that there would be no hardening of the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic. That's been done in the context of no agreement. Varadkar and Theresa May and Barnier, all down through the past 18 months, have all kept repeating this ad nauseum, that there wouldn't be any hardening of the border in the context of there still not being an agreement. Do you still think then that there might be? Despite what they've all said.
I would like to know how. I would like the information in how that will be maintained. If there is to be customs checks, for example, how is that going to be done? How will that be managed?
And how would they do it in such a way that everybody could avoid them with ease because of the
and keep the border as seamless and transparent as it is? Yes, I would like to know how that's possible.
Right. Okay. Thanks.
Clare, thank you ever so much for coming to see us today. Grateful for the investment and time and effort you put into our evidence session. You can always be sure, whoever is out there listening, we will always listen to what you have to say, and I hope you'll come back to appear before us in the future. So thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Mr. Allister, good morning and welcome to the Northern Ireland Affairs Select Committee. It's a pleasure to see you here. I would be grateful if you could give us a very quick 3-minute rundown on how you and your party see the current situation in respect of Brexit and the border.
You're very challenging, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. My starting point is the democratic compulsion that we must leave. That's the decision. And therefore I utterly deprecate the totally spurious and contrived arguments that have been raised to try and thwart us leaving. When it comes to the issue of leaving as we are today, I am concerned about 2 threats. The first threat is the iniquitous backstop, because the backstop would detach Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom, and the primary and constitutionally very significant way in which it does that is it takes Northern Ireland, or rather leaves Northern Ireland alone within the UK, within the EU customs union. So we legally, constitutionally, internationally are part of a customs union other than the customs union to which our nation belongs. Now that is utterly antithetical to the union and is something which is meant to be so, I suspect. So the backstop, and then of course, because we're also to stay for goods in the single market, it creates the second threat of an Irish sea border, which is equally antithetical to the union, because it means that goods which are our supply chain from GB, 11 billion of goods in 2016 came from GB to Northern Ireland, as opposed to 2 billion coming from the Republic to Northern Ireland, and yet we are to create regulatory border down the Irish Sea, courtesy of the backstop, which would cripple and hinder the economic development of Northern Ireland and diverge it away from the UK and align it with the customs territory of which it is a part. And that, no doubt, is the game plan. So the backstop is utterly toxic, and it's not a question of its duration. It's a question of sovereignty. So the backstop for 1 day is equally unacceptable as a backstop for 10 years because of that. My second area of concern is these fatuous arguments that have been raised about, the threat of a hard border. What is a hard border? I find it astounding that we have a draft international agreement which willy-nilly uses the phrase hard border and never once defines it. In the protocol, we make a commitment to avoid a hard border, but no one has ever, in the 500 pages, said what a hard border is. Surely that's the least to which we're entitled, and that leaves scope, as it has been fully exploited, for hysterical descriptions of a hard border. And you see it most frequently if you see a television scheme talking about the border and then they simultaneously flash soldiers on the border. We never had soldiers on the border because of customs difference. We had soldiers on the border because of terrorism. So, that to me is totally disingenuous, because the hard border is essential. The whole notion is built on a hoax. Because who's going to build this border? Dublin says no. London says no. So who's providing it? Well, of course, in EU law, the only people who could provide it or could be compelled to provide it is the Republic, because of their treaty obligation to maintain the EU's border if it's in their territory. So is Mr. Barnier and Mr. Juncker going to make Mr. Varadkar physically partition Ireland? Well, if so, those who want to protest, I think, know who they should be protesting against when it comes to that. And the second utterly fatuous concern that's raised is that in some way this agreement breaches the Belfast Agreement. It does no such thing. The Supreme Court has already said that there is nothing in the Belfast Agreement to hinder Brexit. It does not impinge upon the Belfast Agreement at all. The EU was not a party to the Belfast Agreement. It was not Membership of the EU is not a precondition to the Belfast Agreement. All the structures and institutions of the Belfast Agreement, like them or dislike them, continue with or without UK membership of the EU. So it is totally disingenuous to say that the threat that exists to the Belfast Agreement comes from Brexit. It does not. And that, I think, has covered deliberately for many the hysterical debate there's been about Brexit, and it has been a weapon used to try and thwart the far more important weapon, the decision of the people of the United Kingdom to leave the EU.
Very good. Thank you very much. Kate Hoey.
Thank you. Welcome, Jim.
Thank you.
Can I ask you, you've said that you would be relaxed, I think, or maybe perhaps not use that word about leaving in WTO terms. Now, you've heard the reaction from so many people about chaos, jumping over the cliff, catastrophic, all of that. I mean, would you just like to say to sort of Northern Ireland business and particularly Northern Ireland farmers why a WTO arrangement is not catastrophic?
Right. Yeah. Well, a good deal is preferable, but leaving on world trade terms is by far preferable to what is on offer. And I say, first of all, to those who have whipped up the hysteria, I identify the fact that they are largely the same people who whipped up the same hysteria when it was suggested that we wouldn't join the euro. We had the same script from the same people, and it all turned out to be utterly bogus. And I believe it would be bogus. In fact, I see, well, two things. I'm sure there would be many adjustments required on world trade terms. Fair enough. But I believe the first thing it would be a catalyst to bring the EU to the table. The EU has not in any serious sense been at the table. It has been playing the fool with the United Kingdom in these negotiations. The first thing that would bring it to the table in serious terms is a no deal, because they, and particularly their frontline state, the Republic of Ireland, would be the greatest, the party that would find that most difficult. And I also say to our farmers, in the worst case scenario, that there are tariffs, say, on agri-food goods, the point of that argument that is never expounded, the point of that argument that was ignored by the head of the civil service in Northern Ireland in his missive yesterday of hysteria about Brexit, the point that was ignored is that in those circumstances, there in fact would be massive opportunity for the agri-food industry in Northern Ireland, because if the Republic of Ireland's imports to Northern Ireland were priced out of the market, as tariffs would price them out of the market, then there is a huge supply gap to be filled, which Northern Ireland is perfectly located and equipped to fill. So I believe that the opportunities of Brexit have been ignored, played down, and remember this, only 44% of the UK's trade is with the EU. The rest is with the rest of the world. A lot of it on world trade terms. It works. We trade with our biggest single partner, the United States, on essentially on world trade terms. We trade around the world on that basis. So it's not some unheard of anathema. It's something that can work. It's not perfect, but it's better than being shut off as part of your own kingdom and ushered into a foreign arrangement.
The Permanent Secretary wrote that letter yesterday.
Yeah.
Do you think that was right for a Permanent Secretary to make basically a very political letter in a very divided country over this issue?
No, I don't. In the context in which he did it, no, for two reasons. One, I'm still waiting to hear from the Permanent Secretary if he wants to get into this territory. What would be the threat to the Northern Ireland economy of an Irish Sea border? He hasn't produced a page on that, but he can produce multiple pages on the threat of Brexit. Why? Does that not speak to politics? I would have thought it does. And my second major criticism, and I've written to him this morning outlining these, is that he totally ignores the opportunities of Brexit. So I think it was an unbalanced production which reeks of politics in the circumstance where he has not presented the other side of the coin.
Thank you.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you, Jim. Good to see you here. Thank you for your comments. In terms of those who are campaigning for an extension to Article 50,
yes,
do you believe that is a deliberate ploy to try to bring about the end of Brexit?
For most of them, yes. I believe, the clues in the identity of those who largely are promoting it, and their stance speaks to that. I think they see the situation that legally Parliament, in its sovereignty, decided that come the 29th of March we leave. It's not a conditional leaving in the Act, it's an unconditional leaving, which means we leave with or without a deal. So those who are petrified about a real, effective, prosperous Brexit want to upset the apple cart of leaving.
You
and
say,
I think they see delay as
most of them. Do you believe that there's those who recognise that there might be a necessity for a short technical extension to legislation?
If you had a proper deal, well and done, and you needed an extra couple of weeks to dot the I's and stroke the T's and get it through this place, I don't think anyone would be throwing up their arms. But people will certainly object, those who voted Brexit, if they see it as a device to thwart Brexit.
In your view, if there was then an effort to bring about a second referendum in the UK about whether we should leave or remain, first of all, what do you think would actually happen to the body politic if that was allowed? And secondly, if it were to overturn the original views expressed by the people that have not yet been implemented in 2016?
Well, a couple of points about that. I think, first of all, it would be rightly interpreted as the political elite saying to the masses, we know better than you, now we're giving you another chance to do the right thing. And of course that's the pattern of the EU. They've never had a second referendum anywhere other than to try and overturn a rejection. So that's the first thing. But the thing that bemuses me about this proposal for a second referendum, not only do they want a second referendum, but they want to keep off the ballot paper the option of a real leaving. They want the referendum to be something about, do you want Mrs May's atrocious deal or do you want to remain? Well, you know, the remain question's already been settled. It was settled in June 16. So the question actually, if we were going to be correct about it, would be, do you want Mrs May's deal or do you want to leave on world trade terms? The remain question, if we are respecting the previous referendum, they all tell us they do. If they were respecting it, it wouldn't even be on the ballot paper. But to say that it's the only option to the deal is absolutely preposterous.
Very briefly, Kate Hoey asked you about Mr Sterling's letter. He mentioned in that, however, the detail of unemployment and the spectre of mass unemployment if there was a no-deal exit to the EU. Obviously, at the minute, Northern Ireland has the highest levels of employment and the highest levels of inward investment ever. I mean, how did that point make you feel whenever you read that issue about unemployment?
Well, it made me say to myself, is this really the head of our civil service, who should at his heart and in every respect have the interests of Northern Ireland foremost? Is this really our head of the civil service talking down the prospects of Northern Ireland if it dares to follow the national will of leaving the EU? That's how it made me feel, and I think it was wholly inappropriate.
Thank you.
Do you think he would have shown the letter to the Secretary of State before he sent it out?
I don't know that, but if he did, I suspect the Secretary of State, if she agreed to meet him, would have had no difficulty in endorsing it.
Thank you.
Lady Hermon.
Thank you, Jim, for coming on. Forthright, definitely forthright. I won't read back to you the words that you've used to describe the backstop, but I will ask you. I mean, we spent a lot of time talking about the backstop. You know very well indeed that we'll never actually get into the backstop unless we've got a deal. and then we've got the transition period, and it's only then that
or never get out of the backstop if we have a deal of this sort.
Well, the Attorney General described the backstop as uncomfortable for the EU as it is for the UK.
But he said there was no exit.
No, let's just go back, Jim. Let's just go back. You've used all sorts of language to describe the backstop. I think no one's left in any doubt of what you think about it. But it will all become academic if we don't get a deal. And MPs are being asked to vote next week in a series of consecutive days on a deal. No deal or an extension. Now, can I just ask you, so you've talked about the backstop, as I said, Lynn. Are you really saying that you are comfortable that the United Kingdom leaves the EU without a deal?
As opposed to Mrs May's deal with the backstop, the answer is yes.
Well, as you
not
know,
comfortable. I would have much preferred a proper agreement. I would have much preferred the British government to have conducted in a genuine bona fide negotiation instead of rolling over every time. But we are where we are.
Thank you. Got the words exactly what I was about to say. We are where we are. MPs are being asked to vote next week on this deal with some, whatever is going to come back from the Attorney General Geoffrey Cox's negotiations in Brussels about the backstop. In legislation, Brexit Day is set for the 29th of March. That is not going to change. That is not going to change. Are you really saying to the people of Northern Ireland that they would be infinitely better off without a deal come next week?
I'm saying to them they would be infinitely better off.
There's no other deal. There is no other deal. There's no time for any other deal, Jim.
Right. Well, the alternative was Mrs May's deal. They'd be infinitely better off without Mrs May's deal. And if that means that the government has failed because of EU belligerence to improve that, and the choice is to leave or to stay, then we leave.
Right. So you are saying you're comfortable that
I wouldn't say comfortable,
right.
But I would have much rather had a proper deal. I'd have much rather if we had a government which early on had prepared for leaving with no deal. But being where we are, if the choice was the backstop or no deal, then the no deal is by far preferable.
Right. So we end up with no deal. And you will know perfectly well that the Republic of Ireland remains within the EU so that the border becomes an external border for the EU. There will be a hard border.
Yeah,
the consequence, sorry Jim, let me ask the question please. The Chief Constable of the PSNI, who's had a long distinguished service both in the RUC and in the PSNI, has repeatedly and consistently said that we must not underestimate the threat from dissident Republicans, the new IRA, along the border. And I will read to you what he said. That those who say the PSNI and others are, quote, overplaying the border and Brexit in policing terms are, quote, simply wrong. Can you recognise the threat from dissident Republicans if there is a hard border and no deal? Do you accept the analysis of the Chief Constable?
I can accept a Chief Constable playing politics. I can recognise that.
Please don't.
Let's deconstruct what he said. Is the Chief Constable, and are you, in endorsing it, really saying that we must cut our cloth on Brexit in order to pander to a terrorist threat? That in case someone would dare to take up the gun again, we must shape the situation so that there's no incentive? Have we really got to the point where we're building our politics and our international agreements on pandering to terrorism? We did it once, once was enough.
Absolutely refusing to allow you to say that the Chief Constable is playing politics. Absolutely refute that. I think that's an appalling thing for you to say about the present Chief Constable.
I think he's been playing politics
in
embracing the anti-Brexit language of the anti-Brexit tears, and in talking up the threat from terrorism as a reason for not having a proper Brexit.
Right, Jim, have you ever served in the police?
No, I haven't.
Right. So you think that you are better qualified?
No, you asked me for...
qualified. Or you think you're better
you
qualified?
You asked me for my view. I think I'm entitled to express my view. But you may not like my view, but you asked for it.
Well, I'm asking you, do you think you're better qualified? Because you've obviously indicated
I'm not better qualified on security issues, no.
So, with the greatest respect then, surely the Chief Constable has a duty to warn about the policing implications of a hard border and no deal. He has a duty to do so.
The first duty of the Chief Constable is to say, whatever the political arrangements, I will police them. That's his first duty.
Well, let's move. We have a policing issue if there's going to be a hard border. We also have, and you cannot ignore the fact, there will be a significant play by Sinn Féin if there were ever to be a hardening of the border and no deal. Sinn Féin will use...
What is a hardening of the border?
Well, any extra cameras, any checks, there will have to be.
So we're going to pander to terrorism because of a few cameras?
Sorry, really? Sorry, Jim. Please, let me finish the question. You're here as a witness. We're very grateful for you to come. The Assembly's not sitting. We are appreciative of you being here, but can I just finish the question? You will know as well as I do that Sinn Féin will use every single election, and we have local council elections coming up very soon, and Assembly elections, hopefully when we have the Assembly up and running again, and of course general elections. Sinn Féin will undoubtedly exploit any hardening of the border to agitate for a border poll. Do you accept that? Do you accept how divisive a no-deal Brexit will be in Northern Ireland? Can you see that?
No, I don't see it in those terms.
Oh, really?
I have no difficulty in accepting that Sinn Féin, being expert agitators and having no difficulty in the past in embracing the concept of terrorism, will certainly seek to exploit. But I don't accept for 1 minute that Unionist Remainers will suddenly become Republicans. I'm sure I could use you as an example if I dared. I'm sure as a Unionist, you wouldn't be persuaded to be a Republican by virtue of us leaving the EU.
I'm a Unionist.
Yes.
Please don't.
Please don't I said I was endorsing that view. So I don't think that there are any Unionists who voted Remain, no matter how enthusiastically, who suddenly, because of Brexit, will become Republicans. So that Sinn Féin can agitate as they will for a border poll, but I don't believe if there were one, it would change the outcome.
Do you think
reason?
Do you think we'll see a border poll in the next 5 years?
No.
No.
But I think the real reason why nationalism, both in Scotland and in Ireland, is so agitated about Brexit is they can see that a prosperous United Kingdom as a result of a successful Brexit breeds prosperity for all its people, and therefore the appetite for nationalism wanes. And that's why I think nationalism in Scotland and Wales is so, in Scotland and Ireland is so apoplectic about Brexit, because they fear the success of Brexit diminishing the appetite for nationalism.
Let's just put a date in the diary that 5 years hence you and I will have a conversation about the outcome of Brexit.
That's a very good point to bring in Jim Shannon. Briefly.
Mr. Chairman, Jim, thank you for coming along, and thanks for your thoughts today. Very much of my thoughts, by the way, just let you know that. The Ulster Farmers Union have taken a very big stance and said that they always stating that they represent the views of the Ulster Farmers Union. This is my introduction, because as a member of the Ulster Farmers Union, I have a very different opinion. My neighbours have a very, very different opinion. And your thoughts and your discussions with the electorate across Northern Ireland, how representative are the Ulster Farmers Union at this moment of their grassroots opinion? Second question, Mr. Chairman, is along the lines, if there should be any delay whatsoever on us leaving the EU, do you share the opinion that I have and many others have? If this sovereign parliament does not respect the views of the referendum, that there certainly will be potentially, and I've thought about it long and hard, and I've discussed it with many other people, many people feel that there will be a rise in the right wing politically across the whole of the United Kingdom, and there will be a day of retribution for those members who represent Brexiteer seats and don't represent the views of their opinion. That's my two questions.
Well, on the first one, yes, I think the Farmers Union has foolishly got itself out of step with the predominant view in the farming community, and I represent in the Assembly quite a farming constituency, and I'd be fairly confident that that is the view in that constituency. On the second point, I think any successful thwarting of Brexit will have generational impacts on two fronts. I think it will say to many people, some of whom hadn't bothered to vote for years until they voted in the referendum, it will drive them back and say, what's the point? They just walk all over us. There's no point in voting. And I think it will diminish outturn. And I think, secondly, it will enhance the field for those who can play some more appropriately than others on the thwarting of Brexit by the political elite. So I think it would be something that for a generation or more would sow a harvest that would not be pleasant to reap.
I think that's a good point on which to draw our proceedings to a conclusion. Mr. Allister, thank you very much indeed for being with us here today. I've certainly enjoyed your evidence and we will reflect upon it. Thank you.
Thank you.